Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salebox for the 24th of December 2014. My name is TotalBiscuit, rounding up today's Steam deals. As usual, you can check out yesterday's Steam deals on yesterday's video. They should be available for another 20 or so hours, give or take. So I would suggest that you do go and have a little bit of a gander at that. As for today's community choice pick, well, Bully's a really good game. I enjoyed it. I think it's one of the best things that Rockstar's ever made. It also got a really bad rap for no reason, because people saw the name and made stupid assumptions like the morons they are. But unfortunately, Scholarship Edition on PC isn't very good. It's got a 30 FPS cap. That said, you can mod it past that. The problem is it doesn't have a lot of options, and really you should be using a controller with it. For that price, you might want to brave it, because it is a really, really good game. So if you do mod it, head over to PCGamingWiki.com. There's a few fixes here and there, although don't expect your experience to be perfect. For $3, though, it might be worthwhile. Okay, let's begin, shall we, with Far Cry 4, 20% off? Ugh. Not exactly an amazing price, is it? But let's be honest, the game has only been out for a month, so I don't really expect them to go too crazy with it. Far Cry 4 for that price is probably not worth picking up unless you're absolutely desperate for more of what Far Cry 3 was. Far Cry 3 is a hell of a lot cheaper. The franchise pack is also worth picking up there for $2.50, or your regional equivalent extra. You get Blood Dragon, which is well worth playing. Far Cry 2, which despite some of its weirder design choices, is actually very good as well. So just consider that. Far Cry 4 as it stands, it is in a more fun location, and it certainly has some additions here and there, but the PC version is not perfect still, even after the 1.5 patch, and frankly, it is more of the same compared to Far Cry 3, so do you desperately want more of the same? Cool, okay. Well, there's Far Cry 4 for you. If you haven't played Far Cry 3, though, this is a better time to try that instead. Plague Inc. Evolved, 33% off. This game's technically still in early access. It's actually one of 2 games in early access on the Steam sale today, which is rather disappointing. I wish Valve wouldn't do that. But it is a fairly fun game. It's very well developed. It's got past the point of the iOS version. So the game really isn't technically incomplete. They just continue to develop it. The thing about Plague Inc. is that it's a game where you don't necessarily do a great deal. You get to create a virus or bacteria of some description and try and infect the world with it. And you can modify it as you go along, but it's a strategy about really watching what happens as opposed to making a lot of really important decisions as you go. There are some, certainly. It's not like you just sit there and watch it go, but it's not exactly an in-depth strategy game. But the subject matter is good for a lot of people, and it's a hell of a lot of fun to name your virus something obnoxious and conquer the world with it. Also, it's worth noting that this is a game about slaughtering the entire human race, including innocent women and children, and yet nobody batted an eye. But of course, if you do it in a black trench coat and you call your game Hatred, everyone loses their bloody minds. Gauntlet, 50% off. Pretty good arcadey action game is what this is. It's fairly faithful to the original in that it's big and dumb and silly and has chickens in it, and you kill a lot of stuff. It's a reasonably challenging hack-and-slash action game that is best played in co-op. We did have some netcode issues when we were playing online, but for the most part the game works really well. The thing I like about Gauntlet is it's got this little element of competitive co-op in it, meaning that you can screw over the other players. Like, you could run in and steal all of the chickens if you so desire. You can shoot the chicken to destroy it. You can even take a crown which drops at a random point in the level and try to keep it, which will give you bonus points at the end of the level. However, if you die, well, some of your money drops and the crown drops as well, so someone else can go and steal it. So it's got some fun little screw-up elements going on with it that allow you to get into some rather amusing situations. It's a pretty fun game if you have a bunch of friends to play with it. Just bear in mind, it's not particularly lengthy, and the progression system is very strange, and it's not particularly meaningful. So if you're looking to level up your character, well, there's not really an awful lot of that. It's mostly just cosmetic here and there, and the gameplay is relatively simplistic. Terraria, 80% off. Come on, you already own Terraria. What do you mean you don't own Terraria? Buy Terraria, what the hell's wrong with you? Jeez. I mean, if you don't like the genre, I can understand, but really, this is a game that's chock full of so much goddamn content, and is even getting yet more coming down the pipeline over 3 years after its release, that not buying Terraria seems like you're losing money just by not doing it. It's a huge amount of fun, best played in co-op, frankly, and it's something of a Metroidvania exploration game with a heavy crafting element in a procedurally generated world. It's a blast. Lords of the Fallen, 60% off. This is a game that I have difficulty recommending because they haven't really fixed all of the crash problems yet. It is a great deal better now. They've released the 1.4 patch, so they're still getting there, but there are still complaints about crashes here and there. So this is a game that's something of a Souls-like. It's obviously taking a lot of cues from the Dark Souls series, and it does a reasonably good job at it. It's got that fairly slow, weighty combat. You've got to make some pretty important decisions. You can't just slash away. It's got an incredible aesthetic. I mean, it's a gorgeous-looking game if you like giant pauldrons, which I certainly do. It's a very impressive game on PC, and it's a little bit easier to get into than the Souls series. You get something of a more direct and linear path, you get a combat tutorial, and things make a little bit more sense. It's got some pretty interesting boss designs here and there as well, which are, for the most part, pretty phase-orientated, which I quite like. But the performance and the crashing is not ideal, and it's a relatively short game with no multiplayer and not that much replayability. The New Game Plus modes don't add a great deal to the title, so this is the sort of game that maybe, unless you're really wanting a Souls-like experience right now, you wait for further patching, maybe some DLC expansion content to really flesh it out a little bit, and a larger price drop. XCOM, Enemy Unknown, 75% off. Well worth getting. I've sunk a huge amount of time into this game. If you do like tactical squad-based action, which is exactly what this game is, the overall strategy element outside of the battles is pretty minimal. So if you played the originals and you're looking forward to constructing a base and designing things, well, you're going to be fairly disappointed. There is a pretty solid research system behind it, but for the most part, it's busy work in between the various battles that you'll have to go into. Some of the battles do have a tendency to drag on a little bit, so that's a bit of a complaint that I do have. Although I will say the addition of the Enemy Within expansion is absolutely worthwhile. It added another class to the game, bunch of new tech, more antagonists, more missions to play. It really did expand the game quite significantly. Now, if you're looking for a more challenging experience, they do happen to also have a mod called The Long War, which is well worth playing if you are willing to take on something which is ludicrously challenging. And that's exactly what The Long War is. It is a very, very difficult game indeed at that point. But yeah, XCOM Enemy Unknown is a nice take on the old classic. If you're looking for something a little bit more faithful to the classics, then you want to be looking at Xenonauts, not XCOM Enemy Unknown. But this is no doubt a solid reinterpretation of the classic. The other two pieces of DLC for it, by the way, Slingshot and Elite Soldier Pack, are really not worth picking up. I wouldn't bother. The Slingshot missions are pretty pathetic, honestly. There's not a lot of content there. The Evil Within, 66% off, which sounds good in theory, but it's still pretty damn expensive. This is a game that did not get a good reception on PC because the initial release of the PC port was absolute bollocks. However, as of this month, with the 1.03 patch, the game is a lot better. They took away the letterboxing, they didn't lock the damn game at 30 FPS, although getting 60 frames per second is very difficult with this game. It is not a well-optimized port at all. You are going to need a pretty beastly PC if you want to run it well, and it still doesn't have proper SLI support, if you can actually believe it. You've got to mess around with NVIDIA Inspector if you want to get that going. Outside of that, it's an attempt to revive survival horror in the Resident Evil style, but doesn't really seem to do a great job at it. And frankly, do people really want the slow, clunky controls of Resident Evil in 2014? Well, it seems the answer to that, for the most part, was, well, no, they don't. If you do want that, then The Evil Within is a relatively scary and challenging game, and it does evoke memories of the old tank control survival horror games. If you're not after that, though, you can safely avoid. Life is Feudal, 33% off, our second early access game today. So this game looks very promising. It's about building things in a medieval world. It's a big sandbox, and a lot of people have compared it to the older and still active MMO Worm Online, which allowed for things like terraforming and crafting. Very crafting-focused, gathering-focused, survival sort of game, and that is great if you have a group of friends to play with and you're willing to accept that the game is extremely grindy and is definitely lacking in content. Again, it's an early access game. If you intend to play it on your own, the game is a sodding nightmare because it takes forever to get anything done. I have no doubt that this game is going to be very interesting once it finishes, and once it finishes, I will have a proper look at it, but as it stands, I'm not willing to invest the time into something that clearly is not done. And finally, Ultra Street Fighter 4, 40% off. So this is a standalone version of Street Fighter 4 with all of the expansions. So you got Super Street Fighter 4, Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition in there, Ultra Street Fighter 4. It's got all of the characters and stages and modes from those things. You can also buy the upgrade if you happen to already own Arcade Edition. So here's the thing about Street Fighter 4 on PC. It runs absolutely fine. No problem at all. Good port. Locked to 60 frames per second, but that's frankly to be expected from a fighting game because of the way that frame timings work. Runs really, really well. Also has a bit of mod support here and there. You can mod in your own skins and change things around, things like that. And it's a great game in its own right. I absolutely love Street Fighter 4. I've poured like 100 hours into that game. But here's the thing. If you don't have someone to play it with in your house or a group of friends to come around, you're going to have to rely on the online mode. And one would think after removing Games for Windows Live that the matchmaking would have got better and more reliable. It was actually the exact opposite. Even though it has Steamworks, the game frequently drops connections and frequently has latency issues in the online multiplayer, which means that there aren't that many players in the PC scene for it, and there's a wild skill differentiation between them. That's assuming that you actually get a lag-free game. That's the problem with it. Capcom doesn't seem all that interested in fixing Ultra Street Fighter 4 as it stands, so unless you have people to play with locally or you're really interested in the single player, which frankly is somewhat lacking, then unfortunately I can't recommend Street Fighter 4, which sucks because I love that game. Oh well, there you go. There are your Steam sales for today. Thank you very much for watching, folks, and I actually might be back tomorrow, yep, on Christmas Day with a Steam sale roundup because I am that damn kind to you. Maybe. Maybe I'm going to be a Grinch this year. That's a possibility. I'll see you next time.